this guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
We are pleased to have with us today the Honourable François-Philippe Champagne, Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, who is here with the Honourable Cristina Freeland, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Thank you both for being here.
My initial questions will be to the Minister of Finance, Minister Freeland. Mr. Freeland, what's the deficit this year?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Perkins, and this gives me an opportunity to say how glad I will be to present the fall economic statement on Monday in the House of Commons, and there will be full transparency for all Canadians and all MPs about Canada's financial position.
Thank you. When you delivered the budget, you said it won't be above 40 billion, and that there are guardrails. But we know that the Parliamentary Budget Officer has said otherwise, that you're already through that, plus you've added more on the GST. So can you tell me, is the deficit going to stay at the $40 billion that you said was the maximum in the budget?
I'm very glad, Mr. Perkins, to hear you quoting the Parliamentary Budget Officer. He reported very significantly this summer that Canada's fiscal position is sustainable. Indeed, this summer he said that our fiscal position is sustainable over the long term, and that even a permanent swing of 1.5% of GDP would be permissible while retaining Canada's fiscal sustainability. That is really good news for all Canadians, especially entering as we are, as my colleague, the Minister of Industry, has just said, a time of real global uncertainty.
But as the Minister of Finance, you must know what the deficit is, whether or not, since we're almost 3/4 of the way through, are you going to stick to the $40 billion you told Parliament you would not go above, that was your fiscal guardrail? It wasn't going to go above that.
Thanks again for the question, Mr. Perkins. I do want to be very clear and assure all MPs and all Canadians that Canada's public finances are sustainable. Mm-hmm. Canada has the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. We have the lowest deficit in the G7. Our public finances are sustainable, as the PBO has made clear, and I am really looking forward to delivering the fall economic statement on Monday in the House of Commons.
So, since you've been minister, you've delivered a number of budgets. Have any of those budgets that you delivered, has the deficit come in as projected? Has any one of them come in as projected?
Actually, Mr. Perkins, we are delivering a far stronger and faster rate of fiscal consolidation than anyone predicted, including our budget documents, when COVID first hit and when Canada experienced the deepest recession since the Great Depression. The recovery led by our government's economic plan has been significantly stronger and faster than the recovery which Canada saw when the Conservatives were in office after the financial crisis, which was a shock, but a much milder shock than the COVID recession. And I'm very pleased that Canada is on track for a soft landing. Inflation has been in Bank of Canada's target range for 10 months for all of this year, and interest rates have been coming down. That is really good news for Canadians, and that did not happen by accident.
I spent most of my life before being elected in 2021 in the private sector as an executive in a number of corporations as well as on boards. And if the CFO for my company missed its financial projections every single year, they wouldn't be the CFO for very long, neither would the public markets. So why should you remain as CFO of Canada, since you can't seem to hit a single target you set?
As I said, Mr. Perkins, I strongly disagree with the premise. Canada has had the fastest rate of fiscal consolidation in the G7, and we are today reaping that positive harvest with inflation in the Bank of Canada's target range for all of this year, with interest rates coming down, with the Canadian economy experiencing a soft landing. And Mr. Perkins, you spoke about the private sector. The credit markets show they approve of Canada's fiscally sustainable position. If Canada were to,
if Canada's cost of debt were to be,
I am answering.
If I could
Mr. Perkins,
I'll
if I
ask
may
it a
just
different
conclude
way.
my sentence,
Sure.
please. If Canada were to pay what the UK pays for its debt, we would be every single year spending more than $9 billion more. If we paid what the U.S. pays for its debt, we would be every single year paying more than $11 billion more. That is a market verdict on the strength of our fiscal position.
Your officials have leaked to the media that the deficit will be $60 billion or more. So is it going to be that, higher, or lower?
Mr. Perkins, because a Conservative filibuster has blocked the work of our Parliament.
Minister, the only filibuster is your unwillingness to produce the documents.
No,
But I would ask you a simple question. Is the deficit going to be higher or lower than the $60 billion your officials have leaked to the media?
I think that it is very important not to cast any doubt on Canada's financial credibility. So I want to take this opportunity to be very clear that Canada's fiscal position is strong and sustainable and continues,
yes or no, it's a simple question.
To be
why won't you answer whether or not it'll be above or below 60 billion? Did you have your officials leak that on purpose to control the expectations?
Your time is up. I'll now turn it over to MP Area.
Can you tell me what the national debt is? Just quickly, please.
I feel that the MPs at this committee have a lost vocation as members of the Finance Committee. But let me just say to you and to all of your colleagues that notwithstanding the Conservative filibuster, I'm very glad that we'll have a chance to present the fall economic statement on Monday, and we will fully disclose all of the relevant figures. And I do want to emphasize, because people have been calling it into question, that Canada's public finances remain sustainable and remain the best in the G7.
Okay, so you are, you said that your fiscal guardrail was a $40 billion deficit. Your department's leaked out $60 billion. Now, it'd be quite convenient if you're leaked out $60 billion and you slide in at somewhere in between at about $50 billion to see, see, they were wrong. But that still is blowing past your guardrail that you said was in place. So I don't know why you can't just simply say no to the deficit potentially being $60 billion for this particular fiscal year. Why is that?
I am not going to comment on hypotheticals, and I am not going to comment on leaks. What I can say very clearly is that Canada's public finances are sustainable. As the Parliamentary Budget Officer reported in the summer, Canada's debt to GDP ratio, which is the crucial metric, is the lowest in the G7, and our debt to GDP ratio is on a declining track. That is the key measure of sustainable public finances. It is a great strength of Canada, and it's really important for us all to be clear about that.
Okay, so earlier in your remarks, I think it was in response to another question that you said that we had a 1.5% GDP swing that could be allowed when it came to a hit to our economy. Are you aware that your government has just implemented a policy that will directly blow a 1% GDP reduction into the economy?
I'd like to be clear, Mr. Patzer. I was quoting the Parliamentary Budget Officer, who concluded in his independent study of the public finances that not only, but that's important. It wasn't. I just, for the record, want to be very clear.
So you don't agree with the Parliamentary Budget Officer?
No, but I want to be clear that I was quoting his analysis, and it is important, given some of the partisan assertions being made, to bring that objective analysis to bear, to really make clear to Canadians and to international capital markets that our public finances are clearly sustainable. That's why I quoted that analysis of his.
Okay, so you're comfortable with a 1.3% loss in government revenue then?
Again, that is exactly the partisan twisting and falsehood that I'm being very clear to counter.
Okay, so that was Conference Board of Canada that said that. It was Deloitte that said that, not
this was
me,
an analysis of the Parliamentary Budget Officer. And again, given the hypotheticals, the assertions being made, it's important to be clear to Canadians and to capital markets that our public finances are sustainable. That's what I'm insisting on right now.
Okay. despite all of that, the emissions cap is going to blow a 1% hole in the Canadian economy, and it's going to cost government coffers a 1.3% drop in revenue. Ms. Freeland, the carbon tax is causing a huge pain for consumers. The cost of everything is going up. Groceries are going to go up $800 next year for average people, and you are going to increase the carbon tax. Are you comfortable in continuing to increase the carbon tax on Canadians when they continue to go through a cost of living crisis, and it continues to go on day after day? You're comfortable with that?
The fact is that 8 out of 10 Canadians get more back through the Canada Carbon Rebate. And there is some really good news right now, which is Canadian businesses are getting back $2.5 billion through the small business carbon rebate. That is money directly to Canadian businesses and will help them at an important time.
Okay, so when this meeting started, the Canadian national debt was $1.24 trillion. And by the time this meeting is over, just the time of this meeting alone, an additional $10 million is going to be added onto that alone. Just today, an additional $110 million will be added onto the deficit. And that's without you spending any money, Minister. But it's a byproduct of the reckless spending of your government. Are you comfortable with that much extra debt being added onto the national debt for my kids, for my grandkids, for the next generations to be saddled with before they even hit the economy? You're comfortable with that?
What I am not comfortable with is misleading statements about the true state of Canada's public finances. The reality is our public finances are sustainable. That is the judgment of the markets. That is the judgment of the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Our debt to GDP ratio is on a downward path. That is the crucial measure. And I want to be very clear that if the Conservatives are proposing cuts and austerity, cuts to health care, cuts to dental care, cuts to early learning and child care, that is a recipe for failure and austerity for Canada and Canadians. That is a recipe for hurting people and for hurting our economy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question to Minister Champagne, to follow up on your last statement. Since we are dealing with supplementary estimates here, in other words, additional spending for your department, can you tell me how much is in these supplementary estimates for toner cartridge that was used to blank out 30,000 pages on the Green Slush Fund?
Mr. Perkins, I'm always happy to come at the committee when you're there. I must say this is the best gift I have before Christmas. You know, I know you're a man of good heart. You know that what we did was to comply with the requests of this committee to produce 29,000 pages. I know it's a lot of reading for Christmas, but I don't expect a Christmas card from you this year on this one.
It's all blanked out. You're, of course, getting a Christmas card from me, but it was all blanked out. Minister Freeland, I would like to ask you, I have some sympathy for you because every budget that you've presented, you've said this is the guardrail, this is the deficit, we're not going beyond it, and in every one you've missed it. So can you tell me who is telling you that you have to go through in the year after your deficit? Is it Mr. Carney or is it the Prime Minister?
I share my colleague, the industry minister's view that you have a good heart, Mr. Perkins. Unfortunately, I have to correct and strongly disagree with your core assertion. The fact is, notwithstanding Conservative repeated attempts to muddy the waters, Canada has had the fastest fiscal consolidation in the G7 since the COVID recession. We have the lowest debt to GDP ratio. We have the lowest deficit. Markets are rewarding us for that with cheaper debt than the UK and the US. This is what a fiscally responsible plan is. And I would like to point out that we are on track to achieve a soft landing from the COVID recession more successfully than experts predicted at the peak of that recession, which is deeper than the Great Depression, and a much quicker recovery than Stephen Harper was able to deliver.
Because you never meet it. So if I could go on to my next question. On the oil and gas cap, Did Finance do an economic analysis, your department, on what the impact of that cap would be on reducing the production in the oil and gas industry and thus on our economy?
I'm very glad to have a question about the oil and gas industry, because one of the important infrastructure investments by our government is to complete the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which is in service today, and that is estimated to be adding by the Bank of Canada 0.25% to Canada's GDP. That was the result of an activist government that stepped in when the private sector could not get the job done,
fair enough, Minister,
and is
but
adding to Canada's economy.
I noticed that you didn't answer the question of whether or not the department, yes or no, did an economic analysis to impact that cap. If you could quickly, because I have another question I need to ask you.
No, let me be very clear. If the Conservatives are sincere in believing that the oil and gas industry contributes to the Canadian economy and to our national security, as do I would like to hear the Conservatives talking about the value that the Trans Mountain Pipeline brings to our economy. And I have not heard that a single time.
I take it that's
and
a
that
no,
shows,
since you're refusing
that shows
to answer
extreme
the question.
hypocrisy.
So former Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Pola says we're in a recession. You say we're in a vibe session. Can you tell me what people are experiencing in a vibe session that's different than a recession?
What I can say, Mr. Perkins, is that after a very challenging time with high inflation and high interest rates, Canada now has had inflation within the Bank of Canada's target range for 10 months, and I am glad to be able to quote the governor of the Bank of Canada, who said, speaking to the Senate Banking Committee, we are no longer trying to get inflation down. Government spending is not pushing against us getting inflation down. We have brought it down. Again, that is not a liberal or a conservative. That is the independent governor of our central bank, and that is something we should all celebrate.
Are the 2 million people experiencing food banks, a record number under your government, are they experiencing the recession versus the vibe session differently, or are they in a recession when they cannot pay or get food?
It is the height of hypocrisy for Conservatives to claim to care about the most vulnerable. Conservatives are the party that voted against a national school food program. Conservatives are the party that is voting against dental care. Conservatives will have a chance tomorrow to vote on whether seniors should be able to get dental care.
Canadians are just
enough. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's enough.
Ministers, it's nice to have you here. I just wanted to follow up on my colleague, Mr. Perkins' questions about the emissions cap. I'm just curious, can you confirm, did the Department of Finance do an economic analysis of the impacts to GDP of the emissions cap?
Mr. Chambers, I just very quickly want to say I appreciated what I saw was your chuckle when I mentioned Trans Mountain Pipeline. And I do want to say, in the spirit of what the industry minister has said about let's celebrate the great things we can do together, he's been talking about some great trade deals. And I do want to take one bipartisan moment to recognize the work that Ed Fast did in putting some of those deals in motion. And I was glad to congratulate him on the floor of the House of Commons, and I'm glad to say that today.
Thank you. I will pass that along to Ed.
Please do.
But my question, did the Department of Finance, did they complete an economic impact analysis of the impacts of GDP of the emissions cap?
I will just say that I believe, as I think we all ought to, I recognize the importance of the oil and gas sector to the Canadian economy. If it's a no, that's fine. That's why we built a pipeline. And we are very thoughtful about ensuring that that sector can continue to contribute.
I find it hard
and that's why we built a pipeline, which your government failed to do.
I find it hard to believe that the Department of Finance would not have completed an economic impact analysis of a policy measure that great. So is your testimony that there is no economic analysis, or yes, and you don't really want to talk about it?
My point, Mr. Chambers, is that to have the Conservatives
Okay.
talk about the importance of the oil and gas sector when they didn't build a pipeline,
So will
and
there
when
be
they
a
did
loss?
everything they could to stop us from building a pipeline that has closed the differential that Canada was paying to the U.S., that has diversified
Fair
our
enough. I'm
trade
going to jump in because
opportunities
it's
at
clear
a
that you don't want to
critical
answer the
moment.
question.
That is the
So
height of
I'll ask one
hypocrisy.
on Trans Mountain. Will you guarantee that there won't be a loss to the government when it disposes of Trans Mountain? Yes or no?
I am confident that Trans Mountain
Okay.
is to the very clear and strong benefit to the people of Canada. This was a great investment. It is already making our country
Okay.
more prosperous and giving us
thank you very
stronger
much.
national security.
Thank you very much. In the 2019 election, the Liberal Party platform said that increasing amortizations to 30 years would push up house prices and push people further into debt. Yet, just a couple months ago, your government increased amortizations to 30 years. Do you reverse that position? Do you believe that it's going to increase house prices?
As I hope you are aware, the 30-year amortization is focused. It is focused on new builds, and it is focused on first-time home buyers. This is a really important step to help young Canadians have an advantage in the market, get their first home. And it's an important step to create more demand for new builds, which I hope we all agree are absolutely essential. And Mr. Chambers, if the Conservative Party is opposed to 30-year amortizations, then I think
Do an
the
analysis of whether
Conservative
it would
Party should
impact
be
house
very
prices
clear
along with the insured mortgage
those
rules?
first-time home buyers who are going to be able to get that first home in December.
Okay. Minister, look, I think you're in the toughest position, probably next to the Bank of Canada governor, okay? You've made three very big promises with respect to spending. First was when there's no need for stimulus, we'd take it away. That didn't happen. Then it was debt to GDP will keep going down. That only lasted a year. And now you made a promise that the deficit would not be greater than $40 billion. Like, you're in a very difficult position in making these promises. I'm having a hard time understanding why you would make the promises and then have to break them. Like, is there some tension within, like, the Prime Minister's office and your office, or are you fully standing behind the deficit number when it's finally released? By the way, we have to vote on supplementary estimates before we get the public accounts from last year. I'm not really sure there's a lot of precedent for that.
Okay, so many incorrect statements embedded in there. But let me just start with two. First of all, and this is crucial, the declining debt to GDP ratio is the critical thing that underpins the stability and the sustainability of Canada's public finances. That is a significant accomplishment following the COVID recession, and it is significant to be able to do that while achieving a soft landing from the COVID recession. That is something all Canadians should celebrate. When it comes to the work of Parliament, it is a bit rich for Conservatives who have been blocking the constructive work of our Parliament for more than 2 months to criticize that. This is
You can
like
introduce them
an
anytime. The Speaker said you can introduce the public accounts anytime.
This is like an arsonist saying, wow, I don't like the heat and the smoke.
Minister,
That's
we're well over
exactly
time.
what we're
I would like
experiencing.
to wish you both a very Merry Christmas. Thank you for showing up to committee
Yeah,
today.
and let me also wish you a very Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers.